Hey there, welcome to Quick Connect. Today, our topic is quality conversations, and we're talking about clarifying assumptions in quality conversations. So one of the things that we realize is important in our lives is the quality of our conversations with people. It affects our performance at work, affects our relationships, generally affects anything that's to do with, well, work and relationships, right? I would just say that. So Ethan, would you like to kick us off on the topic?
Yeah, sure. So I think, especially with the work from home order and with the whole like social distancing thing, right? I'm pretty sure many of you have realized that when you text with somebody, there might be a lot of misunderstandings along the way. You might not actually understand each other, and then when you meet in person, you're like, "Oh, that's what you meant." And then, even for video calls, because of the lag time, and because of the fact that you cannot be there with the person and read the person fully and feel the space, it does feel very different. I mean, for some people, sense of touch is very important. Sense of smell and being able to be next to the person is very important to be able to have quality conversations. And so that's why when we talk about this, being an expert at digital communication, using digital media to communicate with one another will be very important during this period of time to keep the quality conversations going and keep the relationships still close and still valuable.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the NLP communications model in terms of what goes through our head. So for every one of us, when we communicate, our language and the way that we process information goes through three filters. The filters are deletions, distortions, and generalizations. That helps us to make sense of the world. If not, then there's so much information and it'd be very difficult to manage. But those distortions, generalizations, and deletions often cause problems because they lead to assumptions, right? Our brain automatically fills in the gaps, and those gaps are actually assumptions. Now, if I were to say something like, the car ran over the cat. Now, think of that statement, and you immediately start filling in the gaps. I'll start asking you, what kind of car? What color was the car? What kind of cat was it? Which road? Was it a road? Was it off-road? Or was it in the jungle that it ran over? So I gave you a statement, but then there were lots of deletions, there was generalizations, and you filled in all the gaps. And those were essentially assumptions, right? So I thought that was an interesting model to understand how we process this information and where assumptions come from.
And so it's very interesting because in my perspective, that I think it's important that we recognize this in our communication. Again, in different types of media, whether you're in person or you're on the phone or you're actually calling with the person, it changes drastically because the media changes the way you experience the communication. So you're going to fill in all the assumptions. Like for somebody who just say, I don't like this, could mean completely different things from when he says, I don't like this in person and telling you and looking at the thing that they don't like. So there's a lot of things that will be lost because there's a lot of context being lost.
Right, and there's a lot more information that's lost, right? So if you're communicating over text, you then lose the tonality, you lose the body language, which are all means of communicating. And when those points of references are gone, again, we make assumptions, right? When someone is texting and read the text, we have the tonality in our own heads. We don't actually hear the tone of that person. And that in and of itself is a way that we fill in the gaps. We assumed the tonality of that person. And that causes more problems.
And that's absolutely true. So one of the biggest struggles I think people have is relationships that are very based off human, like face-to-face interaction. You know, the concept of FaceTime, right? So my team has kind of started doing regular session to just be online together at the same time, so that we're all available to talk to one another. And so that the immediacy solves part of the problem, because you if you know what the person is working on when they ask a question, you also know what is the assumption behind it, right? What's the context? We came together to discuss this. We're all here working at the same time doing this, and therefore we're able to deduce this thing. But clarifying assumptions really requires you to be fully aware that you're going to make assumptions. I think that's a very key part of this conversation today. Where the meta model comes in very useful. Are you deleting any information, or is there a deletion in the information? Is there a distortion of the information? Using the word "this" it's a very confusing thing because this can mean a lot of things.
Right. So that's interesting that you mentioned the meta model, right? Just now when we talk about the deletions, generalizations, and distortions that comes in, it's basically the NLP communications model. And in NLP, when we talk about the meta model, it's a way that we dig deep into this generalizations, deletions, and assumptions to help us, and remove all these assumptions. So some examples of metamodel assumptions, right? So when we're looking at distortions, we sometimes have things like what we call mind reading. So in mind reading is when someone goes and says, I know you're feeling sad. That's a mind read, right? Because we don't really know, we're assuming that we know. And then the challenge to answer that would be, well, how do you know? So mind reading is one of the metamodel distortions. And another one that we have is this thing that we call loss performative. So when someone says things like, it is rude to be loud, for example. So loss performative actually refers to that the performer of the judgment is not stated, it's not mentioned. So says who, according to whom, it's loud to be rude, it's rude to be loud. So if you came from a family that was very quiet, and your dad might tell you, well, it's rude to be loud. But if you came from, again, I'm assuming, let's say you came from China somewhere in
some rural areas where,
where everyone is loud. Loud is natural, right? So people don't see it as rude to be loud. Maybe loud is being expressive, right? So we all have these things, and loss performative then helps us to bring back to according to whom. Now, especially when in this situation where we have COVID, right? And people say, it is okay to, sorry, this is my personal pet peeve. It's okay to run in the parks without mask. I'll go like, really? According to whom? Who said that? So the assumption is, well, maybe the assumption was, it came from some authority, but which authority specifically, according to whom? So these are just some ways that the NLP meta model helps us to clarify. We won't go through all the different patterns in the meta model, but if you're interested, we could talk a little bit more about it. And also, you can do online and do a quick search. So that's one way I think it's useful for people to clarify assumptions through the use of the NLP meta model.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we recognize that we are filling in the gaps if we are. I think it's normal for people to communicate, even between the two of us right now. We needed a certain amount of common assumptions that we have between the two of us, me and you, Alex. See, we is a reference to a conversation between the two of us, but it might not be understood right away if we're not in the same context.
Right.
So it requires history, it requires understanding of what's going on, right? So we have certain amount of camaraderie in our learning and our interest in different things. So that allows our language to be a certain manner so that even if I perform the deletions and generalizations, you know the intention it comes from.
Right.
And that creates a very different set of experience. And that's when I want to go segue a little bit further into the discussion that we wanted to explore further, is that the mindset of clarifying assumptions. Okay. Most people don't like asking questions because they don't want to look stupid. Is that true? Okay, that might be just a generalization, but if you notice the crowd in Singapore, and especially as trainers and workshoppers, both of us, we're so used to not having a response from the audience. As in, that's the expected norm. And then if somebody responds, it's like, great, this is a more responsive audience. If we were in other countries, which I've also experienced, and I'm pretty sure Alex, you have seen, asking a question to the crowd might all start chiming in, and quite a lot of people will actually start chiming in or raise their hands. So clarifying assumptions is something that is not very well trained in the East Asian cultures.
Right.
I'm just saying for East Asians for now, I'm pretty sure it works for a number of cultures. But for East Asian cultures especially, I would say for sure, we are taught not to clarify assumptions because why you so stupid, right? So like if you actually ask questions, I still remember when I was growing up, whenever I say, why do you say that? Why would you say that? What does that mean? My parents used to tell me, why are you asking so many questions?
Okay.
Right?
One of the barriers then is basically our own beliefs over clarifying or asking questions, right?
Yes.
That asking questions equals to looking stupid. So if we reframe that and say, look, asking questions is about building the relationship or solving the problems faster, then it actually helps us to get over our own mental barriers.
Yeah, so my favorite way of putting it across to people is your fear of asking clarifying questions is due to your ego of not looking stupid. Like the ego is I'm not stupid.
Right.
And the more you keep on thinking I'm not stupid, you are functioning as stupid because you're trying not to be stupid. As in, we create a cycle that we want to, right? If you don't clarify the assumption, are you stupid? Right? So by not clarifying the assumption and not understanding what's going on, you are functioning as stupid because you're not actually activating the conversation or the pathways to really create a common understanding. That is stupid. That is meaning I'm not engaging and understanding.
Okay.
And yeah.
How else can we, clarify assumptions or demonstrate that we are open to listening?
Yeah. So this is where I would like to share a little bit. So I'm just using a word format. It's very simple. So clarification statement on assumptions, right? So these statements are humble sounding. Which means is I'm putting the emphasis on me not understanding. So remember one very simple part. The reason why people get defensive if you ask questions is not necessarily because you're actually asking a stupid question or you're not asking good questions. The main reason is because they feel like it's an attack on their clarity. They feel like it's an attack on how open or how good they are. So instead, if you start the clarification statement before you ask them a question, you start with this statement, I'm not clear what you mean. So it's putting the thing back, the focus on me, as in I don't understand. I can look stupid, but I'm more interested in looking at what you mean. So especially also with our discussions, I might have a different experience from you when you talk about the car running over the cat. Yeah, I see a Proton Saga running over a black cat in the middle of a road that is right next to JB, right? So we have very different experiences, right? So because I've actually seen something like that before. So because of that, that's why when you said that, I've seen it, I've seen the effects, I have a different experience. So I might have a different experience from you, is saying that I am not diminishing your experience, but this is what I'm seeing from my head. I'm not sure I understand. It's a great way of stating and putting the responsibility of me clarifying with you on me, rather than saying that you're not making me understandable to me. Could I check if is always a good way of seeing whether, so if you think you know what the person's saying, but you don't know for 100%, could I check if this is what you mean? Right? So you start asking the questions like, could I check if you're referring to a car, not a truck? Because right now what I'm seeing is a truck. The clarification through this means.
Okay.
If I understand you properly, what I'm hearing is that's the other statement, right? If I understand you properly, could it be that you are referring to this? These offer people the way to, in Chinese words, we call it 下台啦. But in English, it's giving the person space to actually have a moment to be able to clarify, or even to be able to not feel guilty for the fact that the communication might not have been clear or things might not have been clear. Because it's understandable that deletions and generalizations happen on a norm. But what you need to do is you need to offload it by telling the person that I need to understand more.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Ethan. So we're going to run out of time. Today, we just really quickly covered about how do we clarify assumptions. We introduced to you about the NLP communications model. There's generalization, distortion, and deletions. There's the Metamodel, which you can go research on and help you to clarify those assumptions. And there's the mindset that we need to have, whereby we need to overcome our own barriers to asking questions to clarify. And Ethan has also given you 5 ways to demonstrate that you're trying to understand more what the person is and give them the space to not look stupid. Basically, that's the way I'm saying.
Yes.
Right. Okay, guys, so thank you very much for joining us for the session today. The next session, we're going to talk about...
So clarifying assumptions, right?
The next one, we're going to talk about stating assumptions, right? How do we state
assumptions?
our assumptions to people?
I forgot myself. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, guys, so thank you very much. We'll see you at our next Quick Connect. Bye.